since the COVID-19 outbreak in Australia, the restrictions began to be rolled out, we've been pretty much inundated on a daily basis with, in social and mainstream media, with a lot of messages, some of which are intended to unify us. And I imagine we've heard them there. We're all in this together, we're stronger together, the kindness pandemic and so on. And however well-intended these statements are, it's becoming clear, especially from today's research, that what they can inadvertently do is plaster over the inequality in our community about how people are in vastly different situations and not necessarily getting through and not necessarily getting supported with what they need. So it's the detail of all of that that we're going to get from our panel today. So, Renna, if I can come to you first. Yes, because you're closest to me, so you're the first victim. When COVID first hit, I want you to tell us how that hit you, because you were just saying up there on screen, you were on something like $21 a day after, that's for everything.
That's for me and my daughter, so that's not just for one person, that's for two. And pre-teens, they're pretty expensive bills on everything. For me, I had to go into self-isolation about 2 weeks earlier, so very early in March. And I had my 18-year-old who was doing her first semester of uni. I was doing my first semester of my degree and a year 6 as well. And those first few weeks, it was terrifying. There were such mixed messages. I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, but trying to decipher what was actually happening and having an underlying health condition of COPD, I was terrified that if I got it, what would happen to my kids if I had to leave them at home? What would happen if I ended up going to hospital? So we went into self-isolation pretty early on. But one computer, 3 people all studying really crucial parts of our education. And I didn't get an education as a younger person, so I've waited 4 years to be allowed to go to uni and be fabulous and knowledgeable. So that was... But that supplement for us didn't kick in for the first 4 weeks that we were in self-isolation. So it wasn't just a matter of go out and use that $500 or $750 and get a computer, because it wasn't there.
And for a lot of people too, they were actually having money to stockpile food. We heard about that. Stockpile food, stockpile toilet paper. So, how did that work for you? It didn't sound like you had a pantry full of... Leaves. Yes, I do remember the leaves, yes. But what about the food?
Well, it was hard, and I ended up stocking up on a lot of pasta and stuff that, I did go and get a few food parcels because I didn't want to go out because the kids were also really scared. What we were scared of is what we've seen desperation do to other people. And of course everyone was very, very anxious. I know that we were not orphans alone in feeling anxious. I think everyone was, and that really scared me living in the city, being a woman on my own. I was thinking, what will desperation drive the wider population to do,
And I suppose it's also having that desperation when you don't have that reserve, that financial reserve perhaps.
No, fortunately for me, I have got some really good benefactors. Like I had a lot of people that were ringing and saying, if you run out of stuff, we will help you. And that was very comforting. But it's a horrible feeling thinking, I don't know if I am going to be able to look after my kids. It's a horrible feeling. I think the best thing about, since the supplements come in, is being able to afford my medication. But I remember seeing Jeanie in the supermarket about 2 months after lockdown started, and I cried. I'm crying at bloody Coles. I'm like, oh, my sister! Because I was so isolated. I'm like Auntie Millie. I need people around me to feel connected and to feel supported. And I'm not a very technical person. It was frightening having to do everything online for uni and not having already had that evidence that I could do the course. I started to feel like a bit of an imposter, really, like someone's going to catch me here and tell me that I'm silly for even thinking this. Not having all of those networks within the uni, like peers and relationship with lecturers. And I found it really hard. I was one of the people who found it really hard to access any mental health supports, any counselling supports. I know that I'm looking out here
at most.
Yeah, and I'm looking out here at some lecturers, and I must admit, even as a student, I was struggling hard, but I'm feeling for the lecturers because I'm like, wow, imagine being them, that would be really difficult. But yeah, it was hard.
Can I get you to pass the microphone? And thank you very much for that. You've created a really very full picture there of what was going on, and it was just multiple kind of difficulties, it sounds like. So for you, Jeanie, you've got 7 kids and 4 of them are of school age. So maybe we can just do a bit of the general picture, but also like that schooling. I cannot imagine. What was that like for you? Because you didn't have a computer at that stage.
I didn't have a computer. We didn't have work packages when it first started. So basically everything I've done, I just had to make the stuff up myself as it's going along.
So you had to become a teacher to what, kids in 4 different grades?
Yeah. So my little one, he's pre-primary, so year 3, year 6, and then year 9. So they all each learning different things, and I'm just trying to come up with ideas and different, I don't know, just come naturally really. It was hard,
And you've got 7 people in the house. How are you going for food and services?
It was really, really hard because I would have to stock up on a lot of things, but a lot of things that that I have to make big meals wasn't there, like pasta and rice, and I've got to have lots of bread and milk and all that.
Did you go to the supermarket there?
I was basically going to the supermarket like nearly every day, trying to get stuff, and it was really, really hard, having to go to the petrol stations just to find toilet paper and that kind of thing.
And in terms of money, I don't imagine you were on a very big reserve either.
No, so we didn't have that supplement at the first time. So it was really, really hard, and my daughter that was working, she lost her job because she was in daycare, so she wasn't getting money either. So I'm supporting basically everybody in the house. Also, I've got my daughter's boyfriend that lives there as well. It was like 10 of us that live in the house, so that was really, really, really stressful time for me, and plus the kids as well, watching them go through that, not being able to see their friends and going to school, going to the park and that kind of thing.
You also have asthma, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
So what was happening around that, and in terms of medications and how you were feeling about that?
Yeah, so I couldn't get Ventolins, but lucky I had some already. But yeah, just going out, being aware of if I get it, I'm going to cop it really badly because of having asthma. So I was preparing myself. I would take my gloves, take my mask in my bag, hand sterilise and do everything all properly. And before I come in, I would hand sterilise my hands and all that kind of stuff. I was really, really, really careful. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not good ones. I'll get you to pass the microphone along because I'd like to hear from Tricia and Mark about what you were seeing in this period and what the demand was on you, how you were adapting.
I guess my story is very different to these 2 ladies because I guess the reason I'm here is because I'm the CEO of an organisation, so that's how I'm going to respond, and it's not the personal impact that COVID has had on me, and I really feel for you guys. When it first hit, I was actually in Melbourne and thought, it'll all be over in a month, because that's how I think optimistically most of the time. And we were, the conference I was at, social distancing was sort of mentioned but not really enforced. I was still able to do stuff, and I came home just before the borders closed from over east. And my first response was, what am I going to do with the staff that we employ? Because I was really concerned that it was my responsibility to make sure that they didn't end up on job seeker allowance or that they didn't end up unemployed. And I didn't want to stand anyone down. So my first commitment was to the staff, and my commitment to them was I will not stand anyone down during this period. So as an organisation, we made the decision to keep all of our offices open. We run childcare, so we were obliged to keep those open. We had no idea how we were going to afford it, whether we would end up going down the gurgler because there was no income coming in because childcare was free. And that was it ended up being a very positive thing because it meant that the staff knew that they had a purpose and they were able to still come to work, look after the children, and everybody was able to stay safe. For the other part of Wanslea, the impact was really around our clients. We do a lot of work in families' homes, and we do a lot of that crisis kind of work where families are really struggling with their children. And we suddenly had to turn that on its head and do work with telephones. A lot of our clients don't have enough access to mobile phone data to be able to do video calls. They don't have enough access to data to be able to do even a long phone call. And our staff didn't know how to do that kind of work either. Because it's very different talking to someone at the other end of the phone when you can't see them and you can't pick up those non-verbal cues, and you're trying to provide them support and advice about how they might manage a particular situation. So that was one group of people. All of our group work had to close because we weren't able to, people didn't want to come in. A lot of them were in the same kind of situation as these two women with their own health issues, so they chose to socially isolate at home and didn't want to come to groups, but that meant then they became isolated and didn't have access to services and felt very unsupported, and we were able to offer very minimal support to the group staff that we had. Some of our services we were unable to do at all because they're working with Aboriginal communities and they were closed down, so that part of the work completely stopped. And the biggest group that were impacted for us were our grandparent carers, where we run groups. We provide a whole heap of support for them. They were unable to come together, so they couldn't support each other. We were only able to provide intermittent support for them, and they were the ones that were forgotten in the government's largesse in providing extra financial support. They weren't eligible for the supplementary payments, and a lot of them live on a very, very, very low income. And the research that we've been doing over the last 3 years shows that more than 50% of grandparent carers live on less than $50,000 a year, and a large proportion of that group live on less than $19,000 a year. And so they're in the same situation that these two women.
Was it also the case that the children, the grandchildren themselves, weren't eligible for payments that other children were attracted in different situations?
Yes, so they don't get any extra finance at all. And unlike children who are in foster care, they weren't supplied with devices to be able to do homeschooling. And grandparents are even more technologically disadvantaged than the rest of us because they often don't have the knowledge of how to keep children connected, what that means, how to fix problems, how to troubleshoot, and they weren't getting additional support from the schools in the same way that other children were able to access.
And just briefly too, I think you also said one of the groups you identified when you start were kids who came from families where they needed breakfast club and supports like that to be able to really eat well and be healthy and all the rest. And that kind of went on the outside, didn't it?
Yeah, we do quite a lot of work, particularly in regional areas with breakfast clubs and school-provided meal services. Those all closed down, and so that group of children that are often living in families experiencing high levels of vulnerability are not seen. And so we became very worried about their well-being, and we know that incidents of domestic violence increased during the COVID shutdown period. So there was a whole lot of worry going on in the organisation around what's happening with some of the families that we deem to be the most vulnerable. And we were unable, in many cases, to access information about them or from them. So, yeah, it caused a high level of anxiety for staff.
Mark, can I ask you to weigh in there too about the clients that you saw particularly at the pointy end and how you tried to address that?
Well, it was interesting, Jordan. Things really changed. So the coronavirus supplement made an immediate difference to a lot of people in that they had access to money, but there was a new group of people who were requiring on material assistance and emergency relief. These were people who'd become suddenly unemployed. So people who were on what was a New Start, they largely disappeared from sight for a while because once the money started to flow, there was relief for those people. But there were new people who came into the service system. Overall, though, it's hard to identify exactly what changed because Trish talked about DV. In the Kimberley, we have a large footprint in domestic violence in the Kimberley. We deliver services to men, women and children up there. And the violence levels dropped. Now, when you think that the Kimberley is probably the hottest part of the state, and quite likely the country for DV, it disappeared because of all the other restrictions that had happened. But we also have a footprint in Albany, and indeed they increased in there, so we saw double the number of applications for accommodation in our women's refuge. So what we really had to do was try and for us the challenge was to find where a service was no longer fitting the gap and trying to shift it. And we provide a service, a financial assessment service in a couple of locations, and the moratorium on power disconnections and the rental evictions and those sorts of things meant that the demand for those services really effectively disappeared. But we were able to shift that service to focus on getting people access to food packages. So we partnered with Food Bank to get that underway, and other services to try and fill the emerging needs as they come up. And we were really running with one eye closed because we didn't know what was going to happen. And that was the other challenge for the organisation, was ensuring that we had people on the ground. We didn't close our offices either, but we got as many people out of office as we could. And I think that we were, one of the, I suppose, blessings from this whole process for us was that in that early stage, when the lockdown first happened and everyone thought we were going to be the next Italy, people backed away. So it was almost like we had a window where we could make the changes that we needed to make before the follow-on really came about.
Thank you. Jeanie and Renna, can I go back to you for a second? And we're talking about the blessings that might come out of this. Gathering that the coronavirus supplement did change things significantly. So for you two, what did that translate to practically? You know, well, we saw on the screen some of the figures around what people use the coronavirus supplement for. You know, what was your first port of call?
The supplement has helped my family a lot. So when I was going through homeschooling, I ended up buying a computer for the kids because we didn't have a computer. So when they were doing online schooling, they couldn't do online schooling. So I bought that out of it. And just
can I just say, how did that change things when they had the computer and they did do the online schooling?
It changed it like 100%. It was easier for me as well, like because they could just go on there to what they had to do on their work. It was like online, so everyone gets their own, you know, like open up their account and everyone's got their own stuff. So yeah, it was so much easier for me, so a lot of stress really from that. But also not just about the homeschooling, or I've had the extra money to take the kids out. Like we've gone to Rollerdrome, talking about the scissors, just little kind of things like that, which is not, you know, not a big deal, but to children, my kids, it is a big deal. So they would come home and they'd be so happy, they'd be just like, it's like they won the lotto, but you know, just that little tiny thing just made their day. It was awesome to see my kids how they work, just having that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeanie. And Renna, for you, how did you go in terms of where you were spending the money across bills and mortgage and all that?
So I am those statistics that were put up earlier. I'm one of those people who paid out all my bills and saved, because I also sat a lot of fear for the first 2 months around how it would affect my housing. I didn't know that, because there was no clear answers as to whether or not it was going to be calculated against your rent for Homes West and whether we were going to be taxed on it. So I went and paid like somebody a couple of $100 to tell me that actually the corona supplement's not being taxed. But it took 2 months to get those answers, so I saved, and luckily I did, because then the clutch went in my car, like I said. So
that was what, $1,200?
yeah, I had thousands saved. I was so excited, but it was probably the most relaxed breakdown I've had in years, because I was able to just pay it. I was able to just say, just fix it, instead of wondering, is it going to cost me more to scrap it, you know, like.
And the difference between having a car and not, particularly in Perth.
I won't be able to. I didn't have a car for a couple of years when I first moved up here, and that was fine. I seemed to manage, but now that I'm doing uni, and now that my daughter's going to high school, but other things like she had her birthday in July, and I was able to pay for this term she's doing grooming and deportment. You know, like it's $250, and I haven't been able to afford after school activities for the last year because I've been trying to get myself to uni. Every week is so stressful when I am at uni, because there's parking that comes out once a month, there's internet that comes out once a month, so I'm constantly trying to work out how little I have on my next payday. It's been amazing, but again, now we're getting to the point where they're going to halve it and then take it off us. And I don't know how I'm going to readjust back to having no money. I'm not sure I'll end up getting my degree because I'm just not sure that I'll be able to. I don't know how I'll do it for 3 years, and especially with her going into high school next year, that's everything from scratch. That's every uniform is going to have to be new.
So you'd be going back to that $21 a day.
So my rent comes out first, and then I have $21.50 per day, and I did that breakdown when I gave evidence into the Senate inquiry, and it actually made me cry because I don't often look at it like that. I just know that I'm bloody amazing at being able to budget. And I know that a cup of coffee is not something I've ever been able to budget for. I know that, yes, I'm going to go without lunch a couple of days a week because that lunchbox stuff is, you know, the piece of fruit and something that's school, because nowadays you can't send your kid to school with a white Vegemite sandwich because you're not allowed to anymore. You're not allowed to send them with the cheaper lunchbox treats. You have to send this and you have to send, it's really weird, but anyway, you do.
So you're looking at this looming deadline essentially and going, what's going to happen?
And especially the medication is huge. But the socialisation as much as the medication, I can actually go out and be a part of. Look, I can pay for coffee every now and again, which is just huge. That changes how I'm feeling right now from having this supplement for 3 months. I've been on my medication daily. I haven't had to skip. I haven't had to go, I'll leave that for 2 days, every day. And being able to eat well and be able to socialise like a proper human being and not stress about, because I do manage to be able to keep a little bit over, so if something comes out direct debit, I'm not going into debit. To not have to go and get a cash converter's loan when my car broke down, massive. It means I'm not going to spend the whole next year paying that off and scrounging. But I don't know how I'm going to put my daughter through high school, a new high school, and continue studying.
Yeah. Thank you. And Jeanie, what about you? What's your picture of what's going to happen for your family if the payment goes down?
Well, I suppose it's going to be hard because when I didn't have that money, it was hard to live. Go out, take the kids out. I won't be able to do that as often. Just have special little things that put a smile on the kids' face. Won't be able to do that much anymore.
And also, we were talking on the phone the other day. We were talking about shoes, and shoes are not a luxury. If you've got 4 growing kids and their feet are changing all the time.
Yeah, so I constantly have to keep buying shoes all the time. And clothes. That thing. The same as in the situation with Renna. My daughter will be going to high school next year. So I'll be having 2 at high school and then the 2 in primary. So it's going to be really hard next year than what it is right now. Children at high school, laptops. They both need a laptop in high school. So,
it's usually required, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you. And just before we go to questions from the audience, I am coming up to you just in a minute. But can I get you, Tricia and Mark, to just talk about what you're forecasting coming when the supplement goes and when the supplement goes down?
I had absolutely no idea. I think we didn't know what was going to happen when this all started, and we had to make decisions every single day that were, life influencing for people. I think one of the things that will happen is if they do cut back the subsidies to benefits, I think we will see a really big increase in demand for the services, particularly those that Anglicare and like organisations provide.
And how will you step up to that mark, given that you presumably don't have extra money?
I'll have to come up with a plan. Maybe not my plan, but I will. And I think the other thing that's going to happen is we know that when JobKeeper comes off, some of our staff are going to be in a more precarious situation as well, because we employ quite a number of casual staff. They're mostly women with children. And I think that's where the impact will hit us, and I will need to evaluate what that means for the organisation. And again, I will make the decision that no one will be put off, so we'll have to work around that.
You'll do it somehow.
Yeah.
Mark, what about you? I wonder if you can talk not only about the supplement going down, but a predicted second wave, and what you think that means and how we should be ready.
Do we need to be ready for a second wave? We absolutely do. I don't think we'll have the experience of Victoria, though. I think the hard border closure has provided us with some degree of certainty. I think we will have more outbreaks, and so I think that we're getting better at managing those nationally. So I think that won't have the same impact. The second wave that I'm really worried about is the social wave. And to answer your first question, what's on the horizon? It's absolute carnage. And we need to be having that discussion now. When JobKeeper goes, when JobSeeker reverts, the reality is that the coronavirus hit us socially at a point where we were very, very brittle in terms of our structures for supporting people who are doing it tough. Now we're going to have a wave of new people coming into that environment. At the moment, JobKeeper is keeping people to some degree of well-being. But the unemployment figures, we just won't be able to create jobs at the speed we need to. And if we revert back to the old narratives around people who need government support, we will have carnage. Because we've already seen the availability of rental properties in Western Australia is dropping. So the vacancy rate now is 2%. It was as high as 7%. 2% is too low, so rental prices will start to go up. There won't be enough housing. We've got a shortage of housing already. Our homelessness figures have been taking up. I have got some good news. I might share it later. But I think that as a sector, and as a community, we need to start to revisit the question of what is it that we want to be. I think we've had 20 years of lifters and leaners and narratives of deserving and undeserving. That hasn't served us well, and I think the virus has actually challenged us to look at better ways to do that.
Do you think that the government gets it federally? I mean, they've been able to come in and do this because we're in a crisis. If that crisis looks like it's abating somewhat, do you think they understand what the difference is?
I think they will. I'm part of another. Anglicare WA is part of another coalition that's doing some research on public perception of poverty. And what's really heartening is that that narrative of lifters and leaners isn't shared by the general community. 80% of the population think we need to do something really serious about poverty. So the thing is translating that intent into the political system. And I think the political system's had its ears closed for too long. But I think the community, so that narrative is not the dominant narrative. We need to push that.
And research like this and hearing from you directly from the front line is what's going on.
And as much as it's a frightening prospect to going back to that $21.50 a day, I will say this to me and Jeanie, it's not our first rodeo, as mothers we find a way, and we're not the first generation either that has gone through something like this and that's struggling in poverty, I'm actually quite fearful for people who've never experienced being on this side of the dole queue, and I think that the distress that we're going to see in that population of people who've never actually had to, ask for a hand or have never felt like they're not able to provide for their families, I think that's going to be the bigger crisis. I think those of us that have had to raise our families in entrenched disadvantage have learnt from our mothers how to do that, how to make every cent count. So yeah,
absolutely. I do promise that we take questions from the audience, and I'm sure that we've got lots of questions. So the wonderful Emma Jane Morgan from Anglicare is going to run the microphone to you, and we also have some questions I hope coming via online audience. If you would like to put some questions to us, you can do that. We absolutely have space for you to ask them, and Ren will be your voice in the auditorium. Looking for the question. It's not my bad eyes, is it? No. Thank you.
Hi, this is to the whole panel. I think.
Can I just ask you to say who you are and where you're from?
Louise Gelito from Wacos. I wanted to ask, and this is the whole panel, like Mark's mentioned a recent survey that was conducted, and we know the majority of West Australians agree that people should not be living on $284 a week. What is it that we need to do as to shift, we've got this growing sentiment in the community about, that income support is way too low, people shouldn't be living under the poverty line, not in such a wealthy country. We shouldn't have children going through and seeing their parents struggle so much. So what is it you think we need to do, because we know the tide is shifting in community, to get that happening through the political will of both state and federal governments?
Commitments leading up to this election. I think voting power is where you're going to see the difference.
I think one of the positive things that's come from this is that we have had the income levels of people on job seeker increased. And I think, given what has been said here this morning and what has been reported, they picked the right level. I think we know that that's a level that is affordable from a community perspective, and it's a level that does lift people out of the poverty, above the poverty line. Whether it's still enough, I think there's probably some debate in that. But I think we also then need to take into account the economic argument that government will come with, and that is the disincentive for people to get into work, depending on where that level of income support is. And I think we need a whole systems review of the tax system so that we can afford, we can pay people enough to live on and not be in poverty, but also for that not to be a discouragement for people to work. So there's got to be some kind of way of trade-off within the tax system that means that we do lift people out of poverty, but if we also want people to work, that can be encouraged as well. And I think from a state level, one of the things that we do need to do is we do need to lobby, and particularly coming up to the election, is all of the recovery money that's come out of the state government in the last few weeks has all been about physical infrastructure. And as Louise will say, it's all about men, and it's all about that, whatever the words were up there, the shovel-ready sort of work. And I was at a meeting at CCI yesterday afternoon where they're talking about it's wide, heavy load roads. That's the focus for the infrastructure from the CCI. There was no comment in any of that meeting yesterday afternoon about infrastructure around people, and that's where we really need to be focusing both jobs, but also focusing support to ensure that we focus on what people need, and that we do work much, much better to keep people connected in jobs and not living in poverty. And yes, work and all of that stuff, building roads and building bigger roads and not thinking about railways as an option, it's all there, and it will create jobs, but they're short-term jobs, they're mostly male jobs and they're mostly full-time jobs, so they eliminate a very, very large percentage of our population.
Got time?
Yeah.
I think that we need to stop looking into other systems and structures to find the answers for it. I think we know what the community thinks. We need to engage directly with the community, and we need to start telling government what they need to be doing. I think that we need to engage with community, in community, and have these discussions with them. I think that we're in a really unique position that this virus has heightened people's focus on poverty, and we just need to take advantage of that and push hard. And we need to challenge people not to be neutral. There are too many people in our community that are comfortable and neutral, so they're not for poverty, but they're not against it, if you know what I mean. I think we need to start challenging those positions. And are you prepared for 25,000 children to go to school in Western Australia every week without breakfast? And that's before COVID. So, is that something that, are you prepared to stand by that? So when you're making your vote, is that something you want to vote for? I think we need to bypass the blockages and go direct to where the change can happen.
Other questions? We've probably got time for one or two more. Otherwise, we'll end a little early. Ren, did we get anything on online? No, not online. Okay, Louise, you were wonderful there. Thank you very much for that question. No, it's a really good discussion too. So perhaps I might just end here by asking you get to choose to answer two questions or pick one. And they are, what are you hopeful about? And you might not be hopeful, or you might be. And the other question is, I guess, maybe a little bit of what you just said, but, what are the top two things you want to see change going forward? I don't mind wherever we start. Tricia, you've got the microphone, do you want to start?
You start. Forever.
I think I'm hopeful that we've had sufficient support around the poverty issue that job seeker payments will not go back to what they were before, and I'm optimistic that that will happen. And I think there's been a... No, I think I might just leave it at that.
Okay, Mark.
I'm hopeful and confident that the true fairness in the Australian character will come through this. I think that people will see that the narrative we've been living for the last 20 years is wrong, and that we need to do something differently. And I think there's enough momentum in the community for that to happen. So I think it'll be better.
I just hope that the money, doesn't matter if it stays at 500 or the 200, a little bit extra, does help. So if they can see that that's helping us, then, it should make a difference. But also, if we do get a second wave, I think I'm prepared because I've been through already, financially, emotionally, all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Not your fantasy rodeo.
Yeah. Very hard than before, yeah.
And Renna, you get the last word.
Oh, always. That's quite unusual with 4 girls. I guess I'm hopeful that there is more understanding within the community. For me, it's about how other people perceive me being on payments, being on ad study, and I think that there have been, like I say, that whole wave of people that never thought that they have to see the inside of a Centrelink office now have an understanding that it's not just because people are lazy or they don't want work, and I think continuing on, it's going to be very difficult for those people to re-engage with work, and so better understanding in the community, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Fantastic work, panel. Really appreciated your thoughts. Would you thank our panel?